Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Why, How, and What of Designing an Effective Program Review, presented by Jennifer Gray, our Director of Product Experience, and Sherry Popp, our Director of Professional Development and Customer Success here at Weave. My name is Brianne, and thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you all here, and we're really looking forward to hearing from Jen and Sherry. If you are new to our webinars, I'll quickly review the control panel for you. So over on the far left, we have where your audio comes from, so you can change if you want it through your phone or your computer. We have the chat feature, where if you're having any technical difficulty, you can go ahead and ask us a question there and we'll try and fix it for you. And then you can submit a question at any time throughout the presentation. We are monitoring that the whole time. And you can use that Q&A feature to submit the question, and we'll share those at the end. And then if you do need to leave the webinar for any reason, you can either close directly out of your window or use the Leave Webinar button over on the far right. We are recording the session today, so if you need a copy or know anyone else who would be interested in watching it, we'll send that out later this week along with the slides. And finally, we do have a short survey that will pop up at the end. Your feedback shapes what we do, so we would really appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes to complete it. And we do have a few polls throughout the presentation, so before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and launch the first one so we can get to know who is in attendance a little bit better. So our first poll is, what is your role on campus? And I'll give you a few minutes there to submit your responses. Okay, it looks like we are getting responses from most people. Okay, so I'll end that and I'll share the results. We have 23% staff and 23% assessment director. We have 19% administrator, 15% IE/IR director, and then 7% program or department chair, and 6% for faculty, and 6% for other. Thank you everyone for participating in that, and I will pass it over to Jen and Sherry.
Thanks so much, Brianne, and thank you all for coming and attending the workshop today. Just want to start off and say, I know we're all living in a kind of a different world right now and everybody working from home, and my current situation is that the lawn service just showed up to mow right outside my window. So whatever special things you have going on at home right now, just know that we're all in the same boat, and we are really glad that you came. I want to take a minute just to tell you a little bit about the backgrounds of those of us who are presenting. My name is Sherry Popp, and I'm the Director of Professional Development here at Weave. I came to Weave with a long history in education, first in K-12 education. I taught public school for 15 years, and then stepped into the higher ed world and served for 8 years as the Associate Dean of Institutional Effectiveness at a small private college in Iowa. During that time there, we were Weave customers and used Weave on our campus to do a lot of the things that we are going to talk about in the webinar today. This is one of my favorite things to do for Weave, is connecting with all of you and talking about how to do some of this challenging assessment work on campuses. And I'm going to turn it over to Jen for a minute for her to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Like Sherry, I have been with Weave for a while, but prior to that, was in higher education for about 15 years between 2 different small public institutions in New York, where I was responsible for anything from IR to assessment to program review to strategic planning, accreditation, all of those things that typically get bundled into that assessment and IE office. The second school I was there a little bit longer, about 8 years. They are Weave customers, they still are. And so very much like Sherry, working for Weave has been fantastic because it allows me not only to work with my previous institution, but talk to people all over the country on, and try and support and help the work that they're doing. So we're excited to share this topic with you today. It seems to be a very popular topic. So we'll jump right into it.
Like many of you, on my campus, we engaged in a process of trying to roll out program review several years back. I think it was about 4 years ago. And it was in response to a couple of things. Number one, just the national conversation around assessment and the growing recognition that program review needed to be a part of our overall assessment processes on campus. And then also as a result of an HLC accreditation visit where they encouraged us to engage in a more formal program review process. And so we started work on this, and of course, from the faculty and staff on campus, heard the question, aren't we already doing this, and why are we doing this? And you may hear questions like that yourself as you try to roll out new initiatives on campus. So that's one of the reasons that Jen and I wanted to start off today and talk about the why first, and then do some other practical things about the how and the what of designing effective program review. And I can certainly answer that question from my perspective, but one of the things that I always find is that it's helpful for faculty to hear from one another, or staff to hear from one another, the value that they find in these processes. So I asked a former colleague of mine to just put into words what he found valuable about the program review after he had gone through the cycle. And he said, the process of program review provided a significant help in the assessment and improvement of our program. It highlighted detailed information like specific assignments within courses that we could improve, while also enabling us to see the big picture of how our department can move towards better accomplishing the goals of our program outcomes. As educators, we are constantly pushing our students to learn, apply, and grow in their abilities. The process of program review is something that departments can implement to achieve those same goals and ultimately help our students develop their skills in learning. And that last bit, I know that was rather a long quote, but that last bit on there that I wanted to share is really where the gold nugget was in all of this, is that this department was able to position themselves as learners, and found that the program review process was able to help them see where and what to change. Not necessarily how to change it, but it brought to light the things that needed attention in their department. And that was really music to my ears. The other thing that's nice about having these champions on your campus that speak this way is you can use that to encourage other departments as they begin to engage in the process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So we know that there is value to be found. Not everyone finds that value, but there's value to be had and found. And so we want to spend some of our time talking today about how to build your process intentionally and collaboratively so that that can happen on your campus. At least that's our hope for today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jen for a few comments and another poll.
All right. So whether the review is for an academic program or a non-instructional or administrative type program or office, it must be done as part of a complementary institutional process, along with annual assessment planning and institutional strategic planning. We will dig into the practical elements of the program review, or PR, in a moment, but the great benefit of a well-done program review process is that it delivers to the program an invaluable broad picture of the program's strengths and challenges. Even better, it offers the program the opportunity and the mechanism to process that information and make intentional improvements. It is really important when undergoing program review that several things are made transparent to all participating. First is, and you can see this at the bottom of the slide, there is a difference between program review and your annual assessment planning. Program review includes several years worth of analyzed and summarized assessment information, not the details, but a bigger picture of the outcomes, achievements, and improvements over the course of the years that the PR covers. Assessment refers to your annual or biannual, however your cycle is, the learning and the operational outcomes. Your program review includes a broad summary of that assessment data, but also includes many other indicators of program health that we'll go over in a moment. Program review is best when not done annually. Taking a comprehensive approach to a review of a program, the review of program quality requires several years worth of data for reliable trend analysis. It takes time for the impact of changes made to a program to appear in data, right? So typically it takes a semester to implement the changes, maybe 2 semesters, maybe longer, and then collect that data for another semester or 2 to see if the changes had the intended effect. Program review, while data heavy, is valuable only when the program faculty do a thorough review of the data. It's also more valuable when the program faculty receive feedback and support from administration based on the results of the review. Program review, as we all know, also serves an accountability purpose as well. While I dislike the word compliance, we all know that our regional accreditors require a thorough review of our programs and services, especially those programs and services that are not accredited by an outside source. So now we've talked a little bit about the why, right? Why is program review so important? What is it? We're going to jump into the how. But first thing we'd like to do is another poll to get a sense of how well your program review processes are working right now on your campus. And so Brianne's going to put a poll up there on the screen, and we just ask you to go ahead and respond.
Okay, this question is, how effective is your current program review process? And it's a rating scale type response. Okay, it looks like we've received most responses. So I will share those results. And 53% say some of us think it's awesome, some of us hate it. 19% say 10 out of 10, we have a plan, we use it, and it helps us improve learning. 16% we don't really know because we have a plan but haven't tried it yet. And 12% we don't have any problems with it because we don't have one.
Thank you, Brianne. I think I'm happy to see that only 12% don't do a program review, but that's exactly why we're here, so have no fear. I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Sherry to talk a little bit about how to do this important work.
Thank you, Jen and Brianne. And so I think it would be great if we could hear from that 20% or so who said 10-10, we've got it and it's helping us. So if you all have anything to add in the chat or the comments as we go, we would love to hear from you. But we're going to take a couple of minutes here and talk through a couple of things about determining your purpose, creating your process and a template that'll help you achieve that purpose, and then a few tips for as you're going through that work. And then after this, Jen will talk some about the what, like what goes into the different steps of the program review. So as we were talking through and planning for this webinar, Jen and I kept talking about how we wanted to stick to what's practical and steps that you can take away and apply on your campus. But I also believe that having a theoretical framework is really helpful for how you approach this work. So there's a great Hanover research article that really nicely sums up several different theoretical frameworks, and all of our resources are at the end of the slide deck if you want to dive into these deeper. But I'm just going to highlight a few of the characteristics of some of them that kind of jumped out at me as I was looking through this. So first of all, this article was written in 2012, and one of the points that they were making is that the effects of the recession were hitting colleges pretty sharply. And so the first approach, the first framework that they tackle is Dickinson's prioritizing academic programs and services. And they highlighted this as an approach that's really beneficial for times of economic struggle. And so obviously that is something that's going to speak volumes to us right now, as again, we're facing the unknown, and there are going to be some economic consequences of what's going on in a COVID-19 world when we return to college in the fall. So Dickinson's model is intended to examine all programs at an institution at one time. And so that, you may be thinking, that's way more than we can bite off right now. We've got enough other stuff going on. But one of the things that he makes a point in his book is that you should adapt his framework and his model to fit your circumstances. So maybe you can utilize the 10 criteria there to help make some decisions about resource allocations, but you may not be able to do it for every program at your institution at once. The nice thing about, or nice, I guess, depending on who you are, but the nice thing is that this approach can help reveal where some trimming can be done, not necessarily cutting programs, but even making adjustments to course offerings or combining programs together, or creating minors out of majors that aren't accomplishing what they had been intended to accomplish originally. Collins' Good to Great approach, of course, is based on the business model, but there is a later adaptation of that book for education in the social sector. And it's heavily focused on having the right people in the right places to achieve the mission of the organization. So as a framework for program review, it is a little broad and theoretical, but if you're looking for a way to lay the groundwork for a culture of assessment that supports mission, and you're trying to get people on board and pointed in the right direction, this might be a good framework for your institution. The Kirkpatrick steps, I think that this might be especially appealing if you are an institution who is new to the assessment world, if you're trying to earn accreditation for the first time, or if you're an institution who has lost your assessment way. And we do hear this time to time from folks who, after their last 10-year accreditation cycle, it's been 7 years and they've kind of lost their footing. This is really singularly focused on learning outcomes. So in that way, it may not be a true reflection of a full program review. It doesn't really call into account some of the other metrics that you would want to include, but it may be really helpful for an institution to build program or department assessment plans that would be a good foundation for PR in the future. So I view that one as kind of a building block. The Massey model really spoke well to me in the way that it aligns with our current assessment focuses. In the assessment world, we are moving towards a paradigm of focusing on improved student learning rather than reporting or compliance. And so, like some of the others in this list, it falls short of providing like template sections for a program review report. But if you're a campus that recognizes the value in reflective teaching, or the collaboration of professional learning communities. The 7 quality principles will probably be very appealing. Massey calls for the staff and the faculty to position themselves as learners and strive for continuous improvement. And so the 7 quality principles ask questions that get at the heart of that. So I think the benefit of exploring these theories is it helps you lay a groundwork with your staff and faculty for the goals of your program review effort. Oftentimes assessment efforts and new initiatives are met with a little bit of resistance. And so I think one tool we have to kind of mitigate that is providing PD that seeks to inform first and lay the groundwork and then ask people to do the tasks based on that. So others on your campus will want to know what this goal is. And Jen mentioned this previously, but one of the things that you want to do is build your process collaboratively with faculty and staff. And it's not that you're going to just pick one of these items. These are not mutually exclusive. You can meet accreditors' guidelines and still foster innovation in teaching through your program review. So it's not either or, it's as many as are applicable at your institution. But one of the things that we heard, we had some internal conversations together about what we knew as best practices in program review. And one of the things we heard is be transparent with all the stakeholders in the institution about developing this process, build it collaboratively, but then let everyone on the campus know that it was done collaboratively and what the goals are for the whole process. I want to mention on our Weave Knowledge Center, we have a great webinar called New Challenges to Using Evidence to Improve Student Learning that talks a little bit more about this. So if you want to dive into that a little bit deeper, I recommend that webinar. Finally, on this, I want to say that even though academic prioritization may be a real need and concern on your campus, if you're thinking that cutting programs may be something that you have to approach, try to do that in a different, frame it in a different light than program review. So separate that out so that program review isn't seen as something that's punitive. Make this be something that focuses on improving program health so that faculty and staff are vested in it and see it as something that will provide value to them. So you'll want to then create a template that will help you achieve the purpose that you've decided on. And we get a lot of questions from Weave members saying, okay, just tell me what sections to put in the report, right? That's just what they want to get at. What should I put in there? But the true answer to that is that your institution culture needs to drive that. You need to take a look at, first, you need to make this determination about your goals and your purposes, but then also you need to take stock of what's already being collected across campus that can be brought to bear on this. And you need to also ask yourself what types of information will be most helpful for programs and departments to answer the questions that you have. So we always advise members to measure what matters to them, but then also to make sure they use what they measure. So this should not be a kitchen sink approach of let's just gather all the things and put them on paper and turn them in and we did program review. That's not actually effective. So it's not just a matter of collecting data points. There should be some soul searching that goes into this, and the resulting program review report is the result of a collaborative self-study, and Jen will talk more about that. I'm also going to highlight real quickly here, we have another webinar called Coordinating Program Reviews, What Works and What Doesn't by Catherine Wheelberg, and that talks more about this particular issue as well. So there are a lot of other people out there, many of them on this webinar, who've already gone through this process and they have effective things in place already. And I certainly did not come up with this. I borrowed this from someone else and I keep repeating it. But in education, we are in the business of R&D, which is not research and design, it's rip off and duplicate. So reach out to folks and find out what's working for them. It's one of the things I love about our community, especially on the Assess listserv. So if you've determined the framework that you want to follow and the goals that you have for program review, share that out on the listserv and say, does anybody have any templates that fit this? Or do you have any recommendations that fit what we're trying to accomplish? And in my experience, people are very willing to share that information. A couple of other tips are, start with your assessment champions. And we say this often in our business. That's not anything new that I'm sharing. But in this particular case, as you're trying to roll out a new process or use a new template, this is really kind of a political move on your part, or a public relations strategy to make program review look good during the first cycle. You do not want to engage in a battle royale on your campus the first year of this cycle. You want to choose programs that are strong, who understand assessment well, that at least on the surface seem to be supporting the mission of the school. Because then the more smoothly this goes, then you can use the testimonies of those programs to help those in the next cycle buy into the process and even give them tips and pointers. And so one of the things I did, I mentioned at the beginning, a colleague who went through the process first and kind of gave a testimony. And so when we were ready to start year 2 of the cycle, I actually had this department chair come in and talk with the other department chairs who were getting ready to launch into it, and explain some of the ways that they managed the work, and then also kind of give a testimony of how effective it was and how it helped their department. So you can use that to your advantage. Ask for volunteers, and you might actually get really surprised. I was surprised the first year when I was trying to lay out the cycle, like who's going to go in the first year, who's going to go in the second year. And I had one program who said to me, you know what, we think we want to do a curriculum revision. We think we need it. We want to go first with program review because we think that the process of going through the program review will help inform our curriculum revision process. And so, you know, after they left, I did a little dance in my office and celebrated and high-fived and everything, but that's the kind of thing that you want. Often faculty or staff members know something that you don't know about their situation. And so asking them to volunteer for when it makes sense for them to be in the cycle can be really helpful. One of the things that we can do is we can use the programs that already complete a process for program accreditation with an external accreditor, but we want to definitely keep in mind that we don't need to double up their work. So if they're already doing a self-study and creating a report for the state, they don't need to recreate all of that. There might be 1 or 2 questions that are really relevant, that are institutional, that they may have to answer that are not included in the state report, but please don't make your hardworking people do double the work. So finally, I want to say, give yourself the freedom to make adjustments to this. If something doesn't work or make sense at the end of the first year of the cycle, don't make people keep doing it for the next 6 years just because the people in the first year had to do it. If you're wrapping up, you know, if you've made it through the 6 years, then make a plan to re-examine your process and your template and give yourself time to make adjustments. You might think about aligning the review of your program review process with the launch of a new strategic plan. So you're in your 5th year of your strategic plan, a new one is going to launch. Make your new program review align with those new initiatives. It might require changes in your program review because the strategic plan is heading off and adding in some new directions. Also, things that made sense a year ago, even if it's not time for your review, things that made sense a year ago may not make sense now, or there may be new data points that programs really need to reflect on. And one that really comes to mind right now is a lot of you are talking about setting aside some of the data collection this spring but asking departments to reflect on the pivot to remote teaching. And so that might need to be like an emergency adjustment to your program review template to capture that information. Many of us had the pleasure of attending the NILOA webinar series over the last month. It was so good, so beneficial, and there were a lot of great takeaways from those. But one thing that really stuck out and applied here was Natasha Jankowski's observation that programs might be changing drastically in the next couple of years to meet employer needs in a post-COVID-19 world. And so you may need to take a close look at your program review process or your template in order to make adjustments for programs that are changing drastically in the next couple of years, or to adjust for those who couldn't actually complete their review in this academic year. So the last thing I'll say about this is sometimes new themes emerge in our profession, or we become aware of new themes emerging in our profession. One that comes to mind right now is equity in assessment. That's, it's been part of the conversation for the last several years, but it's gaining a lot of traction these last 2 or 3 years. And so if you designed your program review process or your template 7 or 8 years ago, it may be time to ask if there's something that you need to do with departments to get them to disaggregate data in new ways, to take a look at those underrepresented groups. Or you may need to add a part to your template for departments to reflect on how they are addressing equity issues in their programs. So these are all things that it just might be time to make an adjustment or make a change on your campus. So having said that, once you've answered a lot of these questions and gone through this process, creating a timeline is super useful for yourself and also for the faculty, for the staff members that you're going to ask to engage in the process. So I'm going to hand off to Jen now to talk a little bit about the timeline and a little bit more about then the what of program review.
All right, thank you, Sherry. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the really practical parts of the program review, right? What has to be done, who's involved, what are you collecting, and when. This timeline that we're sharing here is a sample of what the process might look like if the plan is for the review to take place over an academic year. Some institutions use a longer time period, maybe more like a 3-semester period. That's absolutely fine. You have to figure out what's going to work best with your programs and your program faculty. It's a considerable amount of work. So sometimes spreading it out a little bit longer will allow you to do a better job with that data collection and processing the data and really using it as a valuable process. If you're using a longer period of time, the blocks on this timeline that are the first 2, the May to July and August through October, those may take place over an entire year, an academic year. You may want to start in January instead of starting in May. So adjust this so that it fits. Again, this is just typical, but creating a timeline that all of your programs are expected to follow may sound a little authoritative, but creating this as a guiding feature, as a guiding document, can be really helpful for your programs. They have to budget time for this report, for this work, into an already extremely busy workload. The timeline allows them to see the review broken down into manageable sort of buckets of work. So in this process, if you want to go to the next slide for me, the program review process includes all of those different buckets that you saw on the timeline. There are many elements that are important for the review process. Every institution, including yours, may have different labels for these elements. So I'm just going to go over them with what we call them. You can call them whatever you like. The first step, though, is to do that internal self-study. And this is where a lot of schools think of this as the program review. But that internal self-study really is the first step in several steps. This is where the program will complete a comprehensive self-study that results in a formal report. We're going to talk about the contents of that self-study here in a second. Typically, the self-study is submitted for internal review, whether it's to an academic VP or a provost or to a committee for feedback. Once that feedback is reviewed, the report is then adjusted as needed and sent to external reviewers. So before we keep going into the actual contents of the program review, we want to do another poll and talk about what's included in your program review process. So before I give away all of my suggestions, I want to hear from you all what's included in your reviews, what's important for you.
So I just launched the third poll. What elements does your process currently include? And you can select all that apply for this one. Okay, I'll go ahead and share those results. 89% say internal self-study, 70% use of an institution-wide template, 65% plan for using the action plans and following through, 57% say process for feedback from admin, and 42% say external peer reviewers.
All right. Thank you to all of you for answering that. It gives us a really good idea of the different pieces and parts of the process that are really important to you. Whether that's how you do it now, and maybe you're looking to change or improve, or that's what you're doing now and that's what works really well. So if you want to go to the next slide for me. So the internal self-study, Sherry's already talked a lot about the importance of a faculty-driven process, not just for the creation of your process and your template, but for the entire review process itself. The data that is collected needs to be owned by the faculty, discussed, and then used by them to make data-driven decisions. Program chairs, department chairs, whoever it is that oversees that program or that department, they're definitely responsible for overseeing the program review process, ensuring that everyone has what they need to do the work, but it most certainly should not be just one person writing this entire report sort of in solitude. We know that quite often that happens. I also know that there are some small programs that may only have one or two faculty and staff. And so that's, it's a different situation, but it's working together to do this work, not just one person sort of in isolation doing the work. The institutional template that you create, the instructions that you provide, and the structure that you create will help make the program review process much more efficient for the program. Knowing what is expected makes any effort more reasonable. We talk about this with our students too, right? If they know what's expected of them, it's easier for them to achieve success in whatever the assignment is. Including a clear schedule, much like the timeline we shared above, allows that program to plan ahead for the work, review what needs to be done. Being able to build this work into an already busy schedule is much, much easier when the faculty and staff know what is expected and when is it due. Program reviews should also include institutional level as well as program level data. Ensure that information is easily accessible to the program, whether it's from IR or your IT. Set up a mechanism so that that data is made available on an annual basis, so that the program can gather it when needed, or just available to the program before they need it for their report. Some schools invite their IR office to take part in the program, maybe to embed that data directly into their report structure, whatever works best for you, but definitely recommend figuring out a way to make that part of the process more efficient, so they don't have to wait or go digging and find it themselves. All right, so the next slide, we're talking about the stuff, right? What should be included in your self-study, in your actual internal report? Most of you probably have done research on this already, and you probably could make a list of more than 100 items that should be included on your self-study. We've sort of boiled this down into a list that includes some main categories or buckets of information that are common to excellent program reviews. So this is not an exhaustive list at all. It's just where we think most of the data may come from. And in a second, we're going to ask you to use the chat feature and tell us other elements that I'm not, that maybe are not on my list, but that are really important for your program review. So share that with your peer participants here in the webinar. The first item there's always some kind of trend analysis. So program review takes place over a 5 to 7 year period. Let's look at what's happened in your program for that period. So whether it's retention, attrition, graduation rates, transfer, enrollment rates, all of those things can be incredibly valuable. Of course, we know that some of those metrics are valued differently depending on whether you're a community college versus a comprehensive or research university. I know that community colleges and 2-year programs, they may not be as concerned with a graduation rate or a retention rate, but maybe they're more focused on a transfer rate or employment after graduation. So pay attention to the metrics that make most sense for the goals of your students. If you choose to do benchmarking, and I see somebody mention that in the chat, which is fantastic, I would just caution that you do so carefully. We recommend benchmarking against your own historical records, right? So where have you come from? Also benchmarking against institutions that are your peers, so that are most like you. Be really careful about nationwide benchmarks for all institutions of your size. That's just too broad. So finding a smaller group of peer institutions will give you some better benchmarking for sure. Your curriculum. So is your curriculum adequate for current industry needs? What updates have been done over the past 5 to 7 years? Have those updates been effective in improving student learning? Including a summary of your assessment data. What has occurred over the past 5 to 7 years? What has changed? What has improved? Cover your faculty information. So what about research, scholarship, teaching, development, tenure and promotion, institutional involvement? Cover all of that. Student support services. Are they adequate for students in the program? Are there gaps? Student information like diversity, participation, satisfaction. Talk to your alumni. Review demand for the program. So an environmental scan or an industry analysis type of review, it can be really helpful. What are current hiring trends? What are businesses looking for in graduates from your program? Survey the companies that have hired your graduates. Ask them about, were my students prepared for that job? What were they missing? Where did they do really well? Take a look at your classroom and your lab facilities. Are they adequate? Are there gaps in technology? What are requirements? Are they being met? Resource allocation can be a big one here. And I know that there was a question that we'll talk about later. Resource allocation can really come into play when you're talking more about academic prioritization, but it is really important for your program to take a look at your resources and make sure that you have adequate resources to sustain that program. Do you plan growth? Do you need more lab equipment? So you're going to be needing to apply for a grant. What are the potential expenses in the near future that you need to plan for? I always recommend doing some kind of SWOT analysis. It doesn't matter what you call it, but somehow assess the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats or challenges of the current program. One thing that we don't do a great job of usually is celebrating those strengths. So as you're going through this review, really pay attention to the things that you're doing really well. there's a tendency to focus heavily on those negatives, those things that we want to fix and improve, but don't forget to praise the excellent work that's already happening. Talk about what has improved or changed since your last program review, since your last anything kind of review, even if it wasn't an official program review. What has improved over the past 5 to 7 years? What did you plan to improve over those past 5 to 7 years? Did you actually do the improvement? Did you actually go through with it? If not, why? And how can you go ahead and continue to make those improvements? And then the last bullet on here, which I'm going to talk about a little more in a minute, is reviewing all of those things and then summarizing. This is maybe one of the hardest parts, right? It's boiling all of that down into what's working really well, what needs updating. Let's make plans for those updates. Okay. I love that as I was talking, I saw the chat just going crazy with all kinds of really good ideas. We will make sure those are included when we send out either the slides or the presentation. We'll make sure those are included. I'm going to read through them in a second here once I'm done talking. So thank you so much. Keep contributing if you think of things as we go. This list is absolutely not exhaustive at all. All right, so external review, not a requirement. Most of our accreditors don't specifically say you have to do external review, but we recommend it. If you can do an external review process, especially right now, it can be done virtually. In current challenging times, especially for health and cost reasons, a web-based review process can absolutely be implemented. You just need the right technology and some really good planning, can absolutely be done. The first thing you want to do is, when you're thinking about selecting your reviewers, you want to pick people that are familiar with your program, experts in the field, and especially who will offer unbiased critical feedback, whether you want to hear it or not. The goal is to learn from your peers, to take their review and use it to drive improvements to your program health. So rule number 1, don't choose reviewers who are quote unquote friends of your program. Don't choose those that are members of your advisory council, because there will be a conflict of interest. You will not get the full benefit of an unbiased external perspective. Make sure your reviewers have enough time to review your internal self-study document prior to the visit or their report. Some schools even recommend sending the previous review, so the one you did 10 years ago, send that one so that they can also see improvements and things that have happened over time. One of the best practices that I read in an article, and I really like the idea, is to include a cover letter or some kind of introduction written by an administrator at the college. So this helps show the reviewer that their work is really highly valued, and that their response to this report will be reviewed by more than just the program. Setting really clear expectations ahead of time for the external peer review response. So I highly recommend, and I've seen this in a lot of the research I did, create a template or a format for the response that you want back from that group, that team. Don't just say, give us your feedback. Say, here's what we're looking for. These are some areas we especially want you to focus on. Get together as a team and send us the report back. Very similar to an accreditation report and site visit, right? If you can provide a stipend for your reviewers, that's fantastic. I know many programs can't do that, and that's okay too. A lot of schools recommend finding a peer institution that have some program faculty that are willing to come and do a review, as long as you send a couple of faculty to do their review, right? So trade these experiences and your expertise. That doesn't cost anything except organizing and time. External reviewers should speak with all of your program faculty, including those curmudgeons that might make you cringe, I'm sure none of you have any of those on your campuses, but we know they exist at other campuses. Other institutions have them, but they do help provide a well-rounded sort of review of what's going on the campus. Students should also be included in the site visit. Arrange for group sessions with selected students who will represent the breadth and depth of your program well. Campus tours should include live class sessions, lab experiences while they're being used by students. And then last but not least, send thank you notes when they're done. They're doing a whole lot of work to help you improve the program quality. Make sure they know they're appreciated. All right, so next slide. While your reviewers are, you've selected your group, you've sent them your report, now they're getting ready to come to campus. These are just some really specific things. If you can do an on-site visit, that's awesome. Make the arrangements for them, lodging and transportation if that's needed. Sometimes that's not needed if they're not far away. Create a schedule for their visit so that when they get there and they know what's expected, they know where they're going to be and who they're going to be meeting with. Make sure someone from the program is there at all times to escort them between meetings and buildings so they don't have to even worry about that part. Make sure they have access to technology. Do they need a laptop, a printer? Do they need access to your internet or your Wi-Fi? Make sure that they have some snacks and some meals. Feed them. They're doing a lot of work. The more comfortable you can make them while they do this work, the better the experience will be for everyone. Again, make sure they have access to that template that you want them to use for their final report. All right, and then we talk about the summary and the follow-through. So after your site visit, this is when many programs celebrate the completion of a lengthy, time-intensive project, and it gets put away, literally and figuratively, right? We've all had that happen. We need to, do all this work and then not use it. It's sort of similar to preparing all of the ingredients for a really complex recipe and then never actually making the dish. In a Chronicle article about avoiding the potholes of program review, Hallinan and Dunn state, most faculty members who have been through a successful APR recognize that the true value of the process is in those intangible results and not in the paperwork that gets filed at the end of the journey. We do have a list of references at the end also. While this may arguably be the hardest part of the process, it can also be considered the most important. This is the so what part of the process. You've collected a significant amount of information. You've gathered extremely valuable feedback from your peers. Now what? Some prompting questions. What did you learn? What new perspectives were offered? What surprised you? What are you doing really well? Make a big deal of that. What is not going that well? How can improvements be made? And make plans for those improvements. I'm going to kind of speed through here because we're running out of time and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So on the next screen, we have a list of tips for successful reviews. We're not going to read through all of these. While I point out just one or two of these, this is the time for you to type in your questions. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. Go ahead and click on that. Put your questions in, and we're going to address those in a second. I do want to point out just the very first bullet on there, which Sherry talked about earlier, but it's worth repeating. If you're just getting started or if you're restarting, with a new template or something like that, start with a strong hallmark, program or office. These programs are already doing a lot of this review work, probably. This program won't struggle with the data collection or the feedback that comes after. Don't start with a program that's already struggling. A lot of times that makes program review political and increases feelings of defensiveness. That's what we want to avoid. We want this to be a really valuable, sort of a feel-good process. It's a lot of work, but it highlights a lot of really important work that's already being done. All right. Sherry, do you want to cover any of these that you think are super important?
I think that we have a couple of really good questions in the Q&A, so maybe I will stop sharing and let Brianne take over and put those questions up there so that we can address those, okay?
Sounds great. Oh, some good questions in the chat
Yeah.
too, for sure.
Our first question on the screen is, can you share thoughts about how best to separate program review from efforts that may lead to program cuts? I understand the rationale, but I'm not sure how the two things would not intersect.
This is a really, really good question. And so while I think there are similar elements in both of those types of reviews, I think the purpose is different, right? So a program review is about your program and the health of your program alone, sort of by itself. I think if you're talking about an academic prioritization, a program prioritization, which maybe, you know, has a different purpose, which is to cut programs or reduce programs or elevate programs, that's a bigger picture look at a bunch of programs. So I think program review data is probably part of a larger academic program prioritization process. And Sherry can talk a little bit about, I think it was the very first model that she talked about, that seemed to be more program prioritization work. But I think that the purpose is different and the goals are different.
I'll just second that, and I would say I think it would be hard to practically tease out the difference between them, but I think approaching this work, if you know that you're going to need to make cuts and you're going to be looking at certain data points to try and do that, try and give it a different name. Do that work in a separate space, not in the exact same template and space where you're going to ask programs to do the program review. So that's all I would add to that one.
Great. How does one make programs rely on multiple faculty to do the work? This is like the $1 million question, right? How do I make that happen so that it's not just one person sitting and doing all of the work? I think a lot of this comes with what we talked about at the very beginning, is that why? Why is it important? Why are you doing program review? Is it just to go through the motions and say you did it and it goes on a shelf? Or is it truly to help improve the quality and assess the quality of the program? I think if more of the faculty in that program or department understand that goal, then taking part in it is not something that you would have to convince them or force. I think they would just all want to, and maybe that's a Pollyanna kind of a view. Sherry, do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah, if we make it appealing, then they'll all want to come, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I also think that you can build in to that external review, or even the internal review with other departments on your campus. And we talked about that with some of our other colleagues, that even if you can't do a true external, you can ask other programs to serve as internal, external reviewers. And in doing that, say part of that process has to be a roundtable with multiple faculty members of your department. And if you get into that meeting and see that half of the people don't have any idea what's included in the report, then it becomes evident that it wasn't a collaborative effort. And so departments knowing that up front may, and again, and we're just saying the possibilities, but may say, okay, I have to do this collaboratively, because on the back end of it, somebody's going to find out if this was written in one office in a silo by one person.
Yeah. And I think some of that applies to the next question, where you have a really small department. It could be that your department is really small, 1 to 2 people, but I don't see any problem with collaborating with other departments, other programs that maybe are going through program review at the same time. Work through that process together. Different programs maybe, but some of the institutional data may be the same that you can pull from. If the programs are similar, you may be able to share an external review team if they're willing to review 2 separate programs. Try and collaborate as much as possible with those other programs that may be similar.
Yeah, and I would add to that, and this is really the reality that I come from. I came from a very small institution, and so some of the programs would fall into that category. And in my role, one of the things that I try to do is provide as much data as possible that then they could just take and they could do the analysis part of it without having to dig and collect and look for those things. So try to kind of ease some of the workload for those small departments. There were certain things that I knew they could probably go find it if they wanted to, or if they had, you know, the wherewithal to do it, but just to not make them have to take those extra literal steps or figurative steps to get the things that would make their review really meaningful.
Yeah. So there's more questions on here, but we're right at the top of the hour, and we want to be respectful of your time. We will answer these questions in writing and include them either in our presentation, our slides, or in some other format, because we do want to talk about these things. We do have a list of resources on here, so you'll get this. We also are going to be doing some Weave software specific training. So for those of you on the call that are Weave customers, keep an eye out for some Weave specific workshops on how you can use the Weave software to do your program reviews. It'll be magical, I promise.
And I think it will really, sorry, Jen, I think it'll really demonstrate how a software solution can facilitate the collaborative part of this. And that's really what Dr. Austin from Arkansas Tech was speaking to here. We asked her how they used Weave on their campus, and it really does help facilitate the interactive nature of this. So,
yeah.
Okay. Thank you again to Jen and Sherry for presenting today, and thank you everyone for attending. Please don't forget to take the survey. You will receive, it will open in a new tab when you click out, and it will be in SurveyMonkey. And then we will send out an email with the recording of today's webinar, and it will have the slides in there as well. And please visit our Knowledge Center, which has more free resources and where future webinars will be posted. So we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
thank you, everyone.